The caller ID said Mercy General Hospital. It was 9:45 p.m. on a Thursday. My daughter Emily had been admitted 2 days prior after a severe car accident. A drunk driver had allegedly run a red light, T-boning her SUV. I picked up the phone. "Emily?" "Dad," she whispered. Her voice was weak, frantic. "Dad, listen to me." "I'm here," I said quietly. "Gregory just left my room," she sobbed, referring to her husband. "I heard him talking on his cell phone in the bathroom." "Dad, the men going to your house right now. They aren't real doctors." A cold, heavy stone dropped into my stomach. "He told them to wear medical scrubs so the neighbors wouldn't ask questions," she panted. "He said they just need to inject you with a sedative and get you into the private van. He forged a proxy signature. He's trying to put you in a psychiatric facility to take control of your estate." I glanced at the live feed from my driveway security camera. A white, unmarked Ford Transit van was currently backing into my driveway. "Dad, you have to run," she cried. "They're coming right now." "I am not going anywhere," I said evenly. "Do not eat or drink anything Gregory gives you. Press your nurse call button and keep the staff in your room. I love you." I hung up the phone. I shouldn't have been surprised. The warning signs had been there. 2 months ago at Thanksgiving, I had found Gregory rummaging through my private study. When I confronted him, he didn't apologize. He merely smirked, swirling his wine glass, and jokingly sneered that the elderly shouldn't hoard capital when the young need financial leverage. He viewed my life not as a family bond, but as a bank account with a pulse. Now he was trying to make his withdrawal. Outside, 2 heavily built thugs in blue scrubs walked up my front steps. One carried a black bag containing muscle relaxants. I didn't run. I walked to the wall panel and engaged the steel deadbolts on every door. I didn't call the police. I opened my terminal. Gregory thought I was just an isolated, retired widower he could easily drug, kidnap, and silence in the dark. He clearly forgot that I spent 35 years tracking and destroying international cartels as a senior forensic accountant for the Department of Justice. "My name is William Vance. I don't play golf. I don't go on fishing trips. My hobby has always been data. During my tenure with the federal government, I dismantled massive syndicates by finding a single $50 discrepancy on a balance sheet. I know how people hide, and I know exactly what financial desperation looks like." The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, piercing sound. I watched the 2 men on the monitor. The taller one pressed the doorbell again. I opened a secure, encrypted terminal on my desktop. Gregory Dunn drove a leased Maserati and wore Rolex watches. He aggressively made sure people noticed. To hire private muscle and forge federal guardianship documents requires immense, immediate capital, or immense, immediate debt. The taller man lifted his fist and pounded on the heavy oak door. "Mr. Vance!" he shouted. His voice was rough, not a doctor's voice. "We're from the county medical board. Open the door!" I ignored him. My fingers moved rapidly across my mechanical keyboard. I continue to maintain backdoor access to several federal financial tracing databases, a privilege of my pension intended for high-level consulting. Tonight, I was using it for a domestic audit. I pulled up Gregory's social security number. Bypassing his public credit report, I dove directly into his encumbered assets and shell LLCs. It took me exactly 4 minutes to find the rot. Gregory wasn't just in debt. He was in severe, life-threatening arrears with an unlicensed offshore lending syndicate. He owed $0.8 million. The balloon payment was due in 5 days. That was why he arranged Emily's car accident. He needed her incapacitated so he could hold her medical proxy. And that was why these thugs were outside. He needed my estate to pay off the syndicate before they broke his legs. On the camera, the second man pulled a crowbar out of his medical bag. My house was built with reinforced steel core doors and shatterproof windows. They weren't getting in. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a private number in Washington, D.C. Gregory's arrogance had blinded him. He had always assumed that because I lived simply, I was weak. 3 months ago, he invited me to a lavish lunch, paid for entirely with a credit card that I now knew was maxed out. "William," he had said, pointing a fork at me, "I need $2 million to secure a mezzanine tranche in Chicago. If you float me the cash from your stagnant accounts, I'll get you a 20% return." "No," I had said simply. His smile had vanished. "You're sitting on a fortune in an empty house, William. Emily is my wife. Don't be the anchor dragging our future down." "My capital's not your life raft," I had replied. He didn't ask again. He decided to leverage my daughter's life to steal it instead. I looked at my monitors. The thugs were realizing the crowbar was useless. The taller one was calling Gregory. And I opened the financial logs for Emily's joint checking account. I traced the wire transfers. There it was. 2 days before her accident, Gregory had secretly transferred $95,000 out of their joint savings into a Cayman holding account. He had already begun bleeding my daughter dry. The coldness in my chest solidified into absolute zero. "You do not touch my daughter. You do not send thugs to my home." The audit was over. The execution protocol was now active. The private DC number was answered on the second ring. "Federal Crimes Division, Director's Office, Mitchell speaking." Marcus Mitchell was the director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. 30 years ago, he was a rookie whose career I saved. "Marcus," I said, "it's William Vance." "Bill? Good God, it's been 3 years. What do you need?" "I'm sending an encrypted dossier to your terminal right now," I said, hitting enter. "Subject is Gregory Anthony Dunn. Wire fraud, interstate extortion, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping under forged medical pretenses." "What am I looking at, Bill?" Marcus asked, typing rapidly. "He owes $0.8 million to an offshore syndicate. He's currently attempting to execute a fraudulent psychiatric conservatorship on me to seize my estate." There was profound silence. "He's trying to commit you?" Marcus's voice turned lethal. "The man who wrote the playbook on asset seizure?" "He isn't very bright, Marcus." "I see the file. Clean trace on the Cayman wires. What do you need?" "I need a total immediate federal freeze on all accounts carrying his Social Security number," I stated. "I want his credit locked. I want his joint accounts segregated to protect Emily's capital, and I need a federal arrest warrant issued immediately." "Done," Marcus said. "His financial existence will be erased in exactly 15 minutes. Do you want an FBI SWAT unit dispatched to your house?" "No," I said, watching the men on the camera. "I'll handle the local symptoms. I want you to crush the disease." The men outside were getting anxious. The taller one kicked my door heavily. "Vance," he yelled, "we can wait you out. You can't stay in there forever." They were right. I couldn't, and I had no intention to. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Gregory's number. He answered on the first ring. He tried to sound sleepy. "William, what are you doing calling so late? Emily is resting." "Gregory," I said quietly, "your contractors are very loud, and they are extremely bad at picking locks." I heard a sharp intake of breath. "Contractors?" he stammered, panic leaking into his voice. "William, you're acting erratically. I sent professionals to evaluate you." "They are debt collectors, Gregory. You owe $800,000 to an offshore syndicate." Absolute, heavy silence fell over the phone. How do you know that?" he whimpered. "I am a forensic accountant," I said softly. "I know about the $95,000 you stole from Emily. I know about the forged proxy, and I know you arranged the car accident to seize the estate." "That's a lie," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I have the proxy. I control the assets." I looked at the digital clock on my monitor. It was 10:45 p.m. The 15 minutes were up. "As of 30 seconds ago," I informed him, "every bank account, credit line, and LLC attached to your Social Security number was seized by FinCEN. Your cards will not swipe. You are, effectively, a ghost." "No," he begged. "No, you don't have that power." "I'm coming to the hospital, Gregory," I said, my voice an absolute death sentence. "If your men are still on my porch when I open this door, I will shoot them. And then, I am coming for you." I hung up, opened my desk drawer, and pulled out my registered federal issue sidearm. I opened my heavy front door and stepped out onto the porch. The cold rain hit my face instantly. The porch was entirely empty. Gregory had clearly made the frantic, panicked phone call. Operations like this rely strictly on silence and confusion. The two fake doctors had vanished into the night, rapidly realizing that trying to forcefully sedate a heavily armed man who was actively freezing federal bank accounts was a fast, guaranteed track to the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth. They left their massive steel crowbar sitting discarded on my welcome mat. I picked it up, examined the scuff marks on the metal, tossed it casually into the bushes, and locked my door. I got into my SUV. I didn't speed. I didn't run any red lights. The hospital was a 12-minute drive, and Gregory couldn't possibly escape. His passport, his personal bank cards, his hidden offshore routing numbers, they were all effectively vaporized by the massive FinCEN network lockdown. He was a rat trapped in an inescapable titanium maze built by the federal government. I pulled into the multi-level Mercy General Hospital parking structure. I didn't enter through the emergency room doors. I bypassed the crowded main lobby and took the staff-only service elevator directly to the fourth-floor intensive tracking unit. At 68 years old, wearing a dark wool overcoat, most people assume I'm just a worried grandfather visiting a sick relative. They don't recognize the steady, as a heavily measured gait of a man who used to coordinate massive tactical DOJ raids on corrupt international corporate headquarters. I rounded the corner of the bright, sterile ICU ward. Gregory was standing near the central nurses' station, furiously and repeatedly tapping his silver credit card against an electronic vending machine display. "Declined," he yelled, banging his fist heavily on the thick glass of the machine. "It's a Platinum American Express. It has 0 limits. How on earth is a $3 bottle of water declining?" The weary night nurse behind the desk looked startled and incredibly annoyed. "Sir, please lower your voice. This is a quiet recovery wing. We have critically ill patients attempting to sleep." "My accounts are malfunctioning," Gregory snapped at her, and completely losing his carefully maintained corporate composure. He looked completely and utterly unhinged. His usually perfect hair was a messy, sweaty disaster, and he was sweating heavily through the collar of his expensive silk dress shirt. "My bank is going through a massive internal systems error. I just need a damn bottle of water." "The error isn't with the bank, Gregory," I said. My voice cut through the sterile, humming hallway like a sharpened surgical scalpel. He whipped around violently. When he saw me standing there in the middle of the hallway in my dark overcoat, entirely untouched and fully awake, all of the remaining color completely drained from his face. He immediately looked over my shoulder, likely expecting his 2 hired thugs to be walking behind me with their heavy medical bags. When he finally realized I was completely alone, his initial confusion warped into raw, unadulterated terror. "William," he whispered, taking a slow, shaky step backward until his back hit the cold vending machine. How did you possibly get here? Did the medical professionals evaluating you miss your house?" "There were no medical professionals, Gregory," I said, walking slowly but purposefully toward him under the bright fluorescent lights. "There was a heavy steel crowbar. But hired men who eagerly break into houses for black market money generally don't stick around when the employer's platinum credit card suddenly starts declining." Gregory looked wildly up and down the long hallway. The ICU nurse was watching us intently now, her hand hovering just inches away from the red security phone. "William," Gregory forced a terrible synthetic laugh, actively lowering his voice to a highly urgent, desperate hiss. "Listen to me. Listen. Let's step into the private stairwell. We can talk about this like rational family members. This whole entire night is just a massive misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding," I said, my voice carrying loudly and clearly enough for the watching nurse to hear every single word. "I understand exactly what you are and exactly what you have done." I stopped exactly 3 feet away from him. I didn't invade his physical space. I let his own profound guilt crush him. "You owed $0.8 million to a highly violent, unlicensed lending syndicate," I stated, stating the facts like a prosecutor laying out an airtight indictment. "To cover that massive debt, you actively arranged for a drunk driver to hit Emily's car, intentionally putting her in this intensive care unit." "Shut up!" Gregory hissed, glancing frantically at the nurse. "Dad, please, you need to stop talking. Your dementia is severely acting up again." "You fraudulently forged a legal medical proxy," I continued, my flat staccato tone completely and ruthlessly ignoring his pathetic panic. "And you actively tried to have me illegally and forcefully committed to an asylum tonight so you could legally seize my estate. You physically stole $95,000 from your wife's personal joint account and wired it to the Caymans just to pay for the hired thugs." Gregory was hyperventilating openly. His chest heaved. His eyes were darting rapidly from the elevator bank to the fire exit stairs. He was desperately trying to calculate an escape route out of the hospital. But a man with absolutely $0 to his name has nowhere on this planet to run. "I can pay the money back," Gregory whispered. Heavy tears were literally welling in his red eyes. He no longer sounded like a corporate executive. He sounded like a terrified, trapped child. "William, you have to help me. They're going to kill me. The syndicate. The final balloon payment is on Tuesday morning. If my personal accounts are permanently frozen. If I can't access Emily's emergency municipal fund, they are going to find me and physically break my legs. Please, you have to unfreeze the accounts." He reached a shaking hand out to touch the sleeve of my overcoat. I didn't physically flinch. I didn't raise a hand to aggressively swat him away. I simply stared at his outstretched hand until the absolute freezing contempt radiating from my eyes forced him to slowly pull it back. "I didn't freeze your bank accounts, Gregory," I said quietly. "The federal government did." "Then call them back," he begged, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "You know important people. You're William Vance. Tell the government it was a massive clerical mistake. Tell them to undo it." "It wasn't a mistake," I said. "You made a very specific mathematical calculation. You calculated that my daughter's beautiful life and my own personal sanity were worth exactly $800,000 to your creditors. You gambled everything you had." I reached into my overcoat pocket. I pulled out a single, heavily folded sheet of paper. It was a freshly printed copy of the encrypted DOJ FinCEN freeze order, marked with the official multi-agency seal. I held it up so he could read the bold, unmistakable print. "And you lost everything," I said. The heavy metal elevator doors at the far end of the long ICU hallway chimed loudly. Gregory turned his head violently. 4 broad-shouldered men wearing dark blue windbreakers stepped out of the elevator. The bright yellow, unmistakable letters FBI were boldly printed across the broad expanse of their backs. They weren't moving casually or looking for directions. They were moving with the incredible, synchronized, deliberate pace of a highly trained tactical financial crimes unit actively executing a high-risk federal arrest warrant. Marcus Mitchell hadn't just sent an electronic system alert, he had sent a fully armed tactical team. Gregory saw the yellow letters. He let out a strange, incredibly high-pitched gasp. His knees buckled and he stumbled backward heavily, slamming back into the metal vending machine. "William," he pleaded, violently grabbing his own hair with both hands in sheer disbelieving panic. "William, please no. I'm Emily's husband. We're real family. You can't let them take me to a cell. The syndicate will easily get me inside a federal holding block. You're signing my death warrant." "You completely crossed the sacred line of family the absolute moment you paid a man to hit her car," I said coldly, looking down at him. The lead FBI agent smoothly approached us. He recognized me instantly from the extensive DOJ personnel file photo. He stopped, stood straight, and gave me a brief, deeply respectful nod. "Mr. William Vance," the lead agent asked firmly. "Yes," I said. "The area is secure." The agent turned his attention to the trembling man practically curled into the corner of the vending machine. "Gregory Anthony Dunn, you are officially under federal arrest for conspiracy to commit systemic wire fraud, massive interstate extortion, and attempted kidnapping under severely forged medical pretenses." Gregory didn't even attempt to fight them. He had no energy left. His legs simply gave out entirely. 2 large federal agents had to physically grab him under his armpits just to keep his body from collapsing into a pathetic pile on the hospital linoleum floor. They aggressively pulled his arms behind his back and snapped the heavy, cold steel handcuffs onto his wrists. The loud, metallic clicking sound was the absolute loudest thing in the stunned hallway. "William!" Gregory screamed as the agents began to drag his dead weight back toward the elevator bank. The sophisticated, flawless corporate VP mask was permanently and totally destroyed. For he was just a sobbing, terrified, broken debtor facing the terrifying reality of his actions. "William, please do something. They're going to kill me. Tell Emily I'm so sorry. Tell her." I didn't answer him. I didn't offer a final insult. I turned my back to the elevator bank before the metal doors even closed. I walked calmly over to the nurse's station. "Excuse me," I said politely to the terrified nurse. "I am Emily Vance's father. I'd very much like to sit quietly in her room now. Is she awake?" The nurse, utterly and completely stunned by the flawless federal tactical raid that had just occurred right in front of her snack machine, simply nodded mutely and pointed a shaking finger down the hall. "Room 412, sir," she whispered, her eyes wide. She's waiting for you." I slowly walked into Emily's private ICU room. The harsh overhead fluorescent lights were mercifully dimmed. The rhythmic, reassuring hum of the medical heart monitor was steady and incredibly strong. Emily was fully awake, propped up slightly against a mountain of white pillows. She looked very pale and heavily bruised, but the profound, frantic terror originating from her earlier phone call was completely gone. "Dad," she said weakly, her voice raspy from the oxygen tube. I walked directly over to the small, uncomfortable bedside chair and sat down. I reached out and gently took her uninjured left hand in both of mine. "I'm right here, Emily," I assured her. Did they come to the house?" she asked. Her eyes frantically searched my face for any signs of hidden panic, struggle, or physical injury. They didn't get inside," I assured her quietly, stroking her hand. "The heavy deadbolts held perfectly, and Gregory will absolutely never be coming back to this hospital or to your house. He's been taken directly into permanent federal custody." Emily slowly let out a tremendously long, shaky breath. It wasn't a sigh of sorrow or grief. It was a sigh of profound, overwhelming, soul-deep relief. Living with a man who was secretly and constantly drowning in massive syndicate debt had clearly taken its unseen toll on her, even if she hadn't known the horrific extent of his criminality until tonight. "Dad," she whispered, looking past me at the sterile ceiling tiles. "Did you know? Before tonight. Did you actually know he was like that? Did you know he was dangerous?" It was the ultimate question of moral closure. It required absolute, uncompromising honesty between us. "I knew he was deeply arrogant," I said slowly, carefully outlining my exact thoughts, "and I knew he worshipped money he hadn't personally earned. But extreme arrogance is not a federal crime, Emily. Stupidity is not an indictable offense. You cannot forcefully freeze a man's entire life simply because you severely dislike his personal character." She looked back at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. "So you waited." I waited until he actively crossed the unforgivable line from a deeply bad husband to a federal criminal. I said softly but firmly. I gave him enough rope to hang himself. He tried to use that exact same rope to tie you down to a hospital bed. He failed completely. Emily tightened her grip and squeezed my hand. She didn't cry for him. She didn't mourn the sudden, explosive end of her incredibly synthetic marriage. She fully understood that her father hadn't ruined her life. He had simply amputated a heavily gangrenous limb before it had the chance to reach her heart and kill her. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, her eyes finally fluttering closed as the exhaustion overtook her. "Go to sleep, Emily," I softly commanded. "You are completely safe. I will be right here all night." 2 complicated weeks later, Emily was officially discharged from Mercy General Hospital and safely moved into my expansive ground floor guest suite to thoroughly finish her rigorous physical therapy. The federal legal proceedings against Gregory were brutally and remarkably short. Because of the absolute inescapable FinCEN network freeze holding all of his assets hostage, he physically couldn't afford to hire a private bulldog defense attorney to obscure the massive paper trail I had handed directly to the DOJ. He actively took a terrible federal plea deal of exactly 12 years in a high-security federal prison simply to avoid the absolute maximum life sentence that Marcus had threatened him with. He filed for divorce directly from his federal lockup cell. Emily signed the legal papers immediately, without a single shred of hesitation or second thought. The incredibly dangerous offshore syndicate never managed to secure their $800,000. But unfortunately for Gregory, they knew exactly which facility he was serving his long time in. Federal prisons have notoriously poor records of physically protecting weak inmates who enter the system with massive, unpaid, violent external debts. That problem was absolutely not my concern. My personal domestic audit was perfectly complete. It was a very quiet, sunny Sunday morning. I was sitting comfortably at my heavy mahogany desk in the deep silence of my study. Outside the reinforced windows, the neighborhood was incredibly peaceful. The terrifying memory of the white van carrying the fake doctors was a distant, completely erased echo. I opened the heavily encrypted DOJ terminal displayed on my large secondary monitors one last time. I meticulously checked the segregated joint accounts. Emily's stolen, missing $95,000 had been successfully clawed back from the Cayman networks via federal mandate, and it was safely deposited into a highly secure, single-signer trust under her exclusive name. Gregory couldn't touch a cent of it. The grand ledger was perfectly balanced. I deliberately logged out of the secure federal network. I decisively closed out the black command prompt. I locked my large computer system, stood up slowly from my leather chair, and walked down the hallway to the bright kitchen to make my daughter a fresh cup of tea. Revenge is a notoriously messy, horrific business for emotional amateurs. For a seasoned forensic auditor, then it is simply a matter of identifying the deeply corrupted file, coldly isolating the dangerous virus, and calmly pressing the delete key. I watched the silver kettle boil quietly on the stove. No one was screaming in my house. No one was attempting to break down my heavy steel door. I'm a simple 68-year-old retired federal accountant, and my house is completely quiet.